Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and today we're working with some beautiful autumnal or fall colours. Let's head down to the board. I'd love to introduce you to the Cozy Halloween collection. I've used a collection of beads from Duo Strand Cinnamon Apple and Duo Strand Harvest Gold to pull together this bag charm. I also added in a couple of beads from a previous box as well, just because these are absolutely gorgeously teamed together. So you've got bag charm inspiration today. You've got all of these glorious colours, including some genuine gemstones. There's some beautiful tiger's eye. There's ceramics. There's lots to love in this collection, but we today are going to be focusing on the bead strand duo in falling leaves. So I've made a pair of earrings with these lovely beads and we're going to focus on this design today. Now I've already created my pair of earrings for the falling leaves strand. So what I'm going to do is to create in exactly the same way, but I might make it slightly larger. I haven't decided yet. The idea is that I'm going to make a pendant to match. In terms of wire, we're going to be working with 22 gauge round wire. I'm working with raw copper. For one thing, it's my absolute favourite wire. For another thing, it shows up nicely on camera, but also the colour is divine with these beautiful beads. So I've got some little seed beads. I don't know the exact size because I'm not a seed beader, but they measure 3mm in length. What I will likely do is add a bail on later to create a pendant, but I'm going to create in exactly the same way as I made these falling leaves earrings. So a word about the wire. 22 gauge wire is a relatively fine wire, and what can happen if you overhandle fine gauge wire, anything that is thinner than a 22 gauge, you can make it brittle, and we don't want that. We want our jewellery to last for ages. So I'm just going to smooth that through one time, the top couple of inches or so, and I'm going to create a right angle bend around 1 inch from one end of that wire. Now you can use your round nose pliers or your bail makers, but I'm going to use my memory wire finishing pliers to create a small loop at the top. What we're going to do is to just wrap the wire around the pin, and this is a 2mm pin on my pliers, so that we start off with a nice neat loop. Now again, I don't want to overhandle the wire, so I'm just going to grip across that circular form, but I'm not pressing down where the wires cross over. And what I need to do is to wrap 3 times around that core wire with the tail. Once you've got 3 wraps, that's kind of the minimum to make it nice and safe. What we're going to do is make sure that's neat and tidy, and then trim away any excess. You can make that bend a little bit shorter from the end if you prefer, save the wire, but I prefer to get a really neat finish, and just a tiny scrap is then in the scrap pot. We do need to make sure that that cut end sits down neatly against the core wire, but do take your time, don't rush, because you don't want to bend that core wire. You want it to stay nice and straight and fluid. So we've got our attachment point into which you would add your earring finding up at the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is to add in a singular seed bead, and these are again 3mm in length. The exact dimension can be described to you in the description below. So I'm going to pop that seed bead up at the top, and then going to create a right angle bend around about 1.5mm from the base of the seed bead. Now if you don't usually use millimeters, imagine it's just over half the length of the seed bead we're using. So just pop your nail in to create that bend. You've got a bit of a gap to work with just there, and we're going to add in our first leaf bead. So the colours are going to be different on my singular pendant as they are on my earrings, just because I feel like a change. So we're going to add in that first beautiful leaf bead. Now sometimes with these leaf beads there's more definition on one side than there is on the other, so I would always say use your favourite face on the front of the design. Allow that to sit really neatly up against the angle change, but ensure you've got that gap underneath. Bring the wire across the back, and you may like to ensure that that wire sits neatly down the central vein of the leaf, and in that way your pendant or your earrings can be double-sided. So let's get that nice and straight, flip it back to the front. What we're going to do now is to fill this gap with 3 wraps. And what we're going to do is to grip firmly onto that bead, draw the wire around, support the head of the design with your thumb as you bring that round, and in that way you won't bend that backwards. A second wrap and a third wrap. So just be careful. You want your wraps to be nice and tidy, but you don't want to squish any of the wire backwards. Again, we're working with 22 gauge, which is relatively soft and malleable. You'll also note that the round form up at the top, that loop is in the same orientation as the leaf and the desk. And that is purposeful because it means that your earrings will sit most beautifully. What we're going to do now is to increase the number of seed beads. So we're going to go for 2 seed beads this time. Allow those to zip line down into position against those little wraps. And what I'm going to do is just pull this gently so that those seed beads sit beneath the first seed bead, just underneath that wrap. They won't be in a perfectly straight line, but you can get it nearly straight. What we're going to do now is to make a bend in the opposite direction to the first leaf, but again leaving that small 1.5 to 2 millimeter gap. And I've not made a very strong bend. It's just enough for me to know that my leaf is going to sit neatly into position. So I think I'm going to go for one of these orange leaves this time. Bring that all the way down and sit it against the angle change. So you need to ensure that there is a small gap. You can just adjust that slightly if you need to. Choose your preferred surface if there is one. Generally speaking, they're very similar. Pull the wire across the back of the design. You can check that that's nice and straight down the vein if you wish to, and then wrap 3 times around that core wire. So there we go. We've got the second leaf into position. For my third leaf, I'm going to add 3 seed beads. So we're increasing the distance between the leaves. It just adds to the dynamism of the design. You just need to make sure that if you are making it as earrings, as I have done today, that you get them to be the same on both sides. So you'll notice that my top leaf goes left on one side and right on the other, so that they're symmetrically matched. Or in symmetrical opposition if you prefer. So again, because my previous leaf went that way, I need the next leaf to come this way. So I'm just going to bring my thumbnail down and just push the wire out to the side. There's that small, it's about 2 millimeters. So if you imagine 2/3 the depth of that bead, and then we're going to add in our next little leaf. So if I have one of the purpley ones, I don't think I do, so I'll have to go for one of these slightly bronze tone ones. We'll bring that one down into position. And it's just exactly the same thing again. So choose your preferred face if there is one. Generally, they're very similar. Bring the wire across the back. Make sure it sits straight if that is something that you want it to do. Hold that in position and then wrap 3 times, and you can support the earring with your thumbnail underneath so that you're not putting too much pressure just here and you're not bending the wire at a vulnerable point. So to get a nice tight wrap, I am putting a little bit of pressure, but I'm using my thumbnail so that that pressure doesn't pull down and bend the whole thing backwards. So bring the wire back down again. And what I'm going to do is now add a 4th leaf. Have I got another small one? I have, but I don't think the colour sequence is right. So I'm going to add one of these larger leaves. But before we add that one, we're going to add this time 4 of the seed beads. So that's 1 and 2. Seed beads are one of my many nemesis. Mind you, it's easier to thread them onto wire, I think, than it is to add them onto beading wire or thread. So again, we're going to leave a teeny tiny gap after the seed beads. So get those to sit neatly up and tight. And then I'm going to have this one going slightly out to the sides. And I might, if I was just making the same design again, I would leave that facing downwards. But I think I'm going to add in 2 of the large leaves. So if you want to, just ignore this step, and I'll show you how to finish off with a final leaf in just a second. So in that case, I might go for one of the redder leaves instead of one of the burgundy leaves, so I can have a colour progression that makes me happy. So again, we've got that small gap between the base of the last seed bead and the next leaf. Bring the wire across the back, having checked it's your preferred face. Make sure the wire on the back is nice and straight up the vein of the leaf, and then wrap 3 times around in that little gap, making sure that you don't bend that backwards. And then I'm going to add in, you've guessed it, 5 seed beads. So you don't have to go through the progression, but you do need to use a seed bead. If you wanted to, you could use one of the spacers from this beautiful strand. Make sure that that goes back in the pot and I can use it later. So I think that's only 4. Let's add a 5th one in, and then we will add our final leaf for today. So I'm going to use this almost mookaite colour. And again, just a tiny, tiny gap. But this time there's no bend because this is the final leaf in my design. So bring that wire up the back, and we've got just enough wire with that 12-inch length to create this large 5-leaf pendant drop. 12 inches is more than adequate for each of those 4-leaf earring drops. So let's have a look at the rear of the design. So you can see, even if you don't look and you don't take time to straighten those veins up, they still look really pretty. That might be the preferred face for you. Absolutely up to you. So again, you need to make sure that there's a gap in between your last seed bead and the addition of your leaf bead, so that we can get those 3 little wraps in. So I'm going to push that up with my nail, and then I'm going to bring that around a second time, and there will be just about enough space to get that 3rd wrap in there. However, what we need to do is just employ those pliers to help. Now you will need to cover your beads if you are using pliers, just to get that last bit of leverage, because you don't want to smash your bead. So that is now sitting really neatly. Make sure when you're cutting your last bit of wire that you don't accidentally trim something else. And then we're going to give that a little gentle squish down, being mindful of that last little seed bead. Make sure you don't crush it. Ideally, pop your thumbnail over to protect it, but I can't also show you if I've got my thumbnail in the way. So that is my falling leaves design. I've generated this one as kind of a pendant, and what you can do is a little bit of manoeuvring just to get that to sit how you want it to, but try not to overstress it because it's a finer gauge wire and it doesn't really want to be overly fiddled with. But there you have the falling leaves earrings, and I will add some kind of bail onto this later so that I've got a pendant to match. Well, I do hope that you have enjoyed the falling leaves tutorial today here at Jessie James Beads, featuring our glorious cozy Halloween collections. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Jem and this is Jessie James Beads. Bye for now.